The smell of sterile bleach, the rhythmic, mocking beep of a heart monitor, and the sharp, metallic tang of my own failing blood vanished in a single, violent heartbeat. They were replaced instantly by the rich, warm scent of polished mahogany and the sickly sweet aroma of the expensive vanilla candles I used to burn in the foyer. My lungs, which had just been burning with the corrosive, suffocating fire of ethylene glycol poisoning a microsecond ago, suddenly expanded. Cool, clean, conditioned air rushed in. I gasped. It wasn't a delicate, ladylike intake of breath. It was the ragged, desperate heave of a drowning woman finally breaking the surface of a freezing ocean. My hands slapped flat against a smooth, solid surface to steady myself. My vision swam, a chaotic kaleidoscope of sterile white hospital walls morphing violently into the familiar, sun-drenched expanse of my own dining room. The sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown villa, casting long, elegant shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. The dust motes danced lazily in the golden afternoon light. I was alive. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My fingers trembled as I looked down at them. They weren't the pale, bruised, needle-tracked appendages of a dying woman clinging to her last hours. The skin was flush with vitality, my manicure pristine, a heavy, solid gold Montblanc pen resting perfectly between my index and middle finger. Directly beneath the gleaming tip of that pen sat a stack of legal documents, thick enough to choke a horse, smelling of fresh ink and impending ruin. A neon yellow sticky note aggressively pointed to a blank line at the bottom of the page. "Chloe, babe, are you listening to me?" The voice was like a physical blow to the back of my head. It was smooth, practiced, and dripping with that manufactured, sugary concern I used to be stupid enough to mistake for love. I slowly raised my head, the sudden, blinding rush of a massive headache clearing just enough for my eyes to focus on the man standing across the dining table. Liam, my fiancé. He was wearing the charcoal gray tailored Armani suit I had bought for him for his last birthday, the one that made his shoulders look broader than they actually were. His dark hair was styled with that effortless swoop that took him 45 minutes in the mirror every morning. His brow was furrowed in a textbook display of worry, but his eyes, those cold, calculating blue eyes, were entirely devoid of warmth. And standing right next to him, close enough that their shoulders were brushing, was Mia, my stepsister. Mia was leaning over the table, her large, doe-like eyes wide, her bottom lip caught between her teeth in a perfect picture of innocent apprehension. She had on a soft pastel cardigan that made her look small and fragile, a look she had weaponized since we were teenagers. Her hand, I noticed with a sickening jolt, was resting just a fraction of an inch from Liam's on the polished wood of the table. My breath hitched again, but this time, it was out of pure, unadulterated shock. I wasn't dead. I wasn't lying in that sterile, God-forsaken hospital bed, my kidneys failing, my liver shutting down while these two vultures stood over me. In that hospital room, in what I now realized was a previous timeline, they hadn't even bothered to hide their affair anymore. They had stood at the foot of my deathbed, holding hands, laughing about how ridiculously easy it was to slip antifreeze into the green smoothies I drank every morning. They had mocked my stubbornness, mocked my desperate attempts to hold on to my assets, and cheered as the monitor flatlined. She fought so hard for that stupid house. Mia's voice echoed in my head, a ghostly memory of the last words I ever heard. And now we get it anyway, without the nagging. I swallowed hard, forcing the bile back down my throat. The sheer proximity of them, the living, breathing reality of my murderers standing in my home, sent a violent tremor through my core. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to lunge across the table, to wrap my hands around Liam's perfectly groomed throat, to claw the fake innocence right off Mia's face. But I didn't move. I froze, my eyes darting to the Rolex on Liam's wrist. The date window clearly displayed the 15th of October. 3 years ago. I was back. I had snapped back to exactly 3 years ago, to the very afternoon that set my entire destruction into motion, the day they cornered me in my own dining room, weaponizing my trust and my love for them, to pressure me into signing over the deed to the downtown villa. In my past life, I had fought them. I had been terrified by the elaborate lie they spun, but my instinct to protect my grandfather's legacy had won out. I had screamed, I had cried, I had kicked Liam out of the house for a week, and I had fiercely protected my property. I had hired independent lawyers. I had uncovered their fake audit scheme. And my reward for that defiance, my reward for setting boundaries and defending what was mine, a slow, agonizing death by poisoning, meticulously orchestrated by the man I loved and the sister I pitied, just so they could inherit the estate without my interference. They realized they couldn't trick me out of it legally, so they simply removed me from the equation. As I stared at the dense legal jargon blurring on the page in front of me, a wildly inappropriate, almost unhinged laugh bubbled up in the back of my throat. I disguised it as a small, polite cough, bringing my free hand to my mouth to hide the way my lips were trembling. Not from fear, but from a sudden, euphoric rush of absolute power. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they were playing a master game of chess against a pawn. Oh, these absolute spectacular morons had no idea what they were actually asking for. "Chloe, are you okay?" Liam asked, his tone dropping an octave to that soothing, patronizing cadence he always used when he thought I was being hysterical. "You've been staring at the paper for 5 minutes. You're shaking." "I'm fine," I managed to say. The sound of my own voice startled me. It was calm, steady, completely devoid of the venom pumping through my veins. "It's just a formality, babe," Liam continued, pressing his advantage, mistaking my silence for hesitation. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the table, invading my space. "It's just to protect the family's assets. Until your business audit is over. We talked about this. The government is looking into your LLC. If they freeze your accounts, they'll put a lien on the villa. It protects the house if it's temporarily in Mia's name." Right. The audit. It was a brilliantly terrifying lie. They had spent the last 3 weeks gaslighting me, leaving fake letters from the IRS in my mail, having a shady accountant friend of Liam's call me with dire warnings about phantom tax discrepancies in my boutique design firm. They had whipped me into a state of blind panic, convincing me that federal agents were going to bust down my door and seize everything I had worked for, and the only solution, their benevolent, selfless solution, was to temporarily hide my crown jewel, this multi-million-dollar property, under Mia's pristine, debt-free name. "Exactly, sis," Mia chimed in, her voice a squeaky, irritating pitch that felt like nails on a chalkboard. She slid the paperwork an inch closer to me, her manicured finger tapping the yellow sticky note. "I just want to keep it safe for you. You know I don't care about money. I just hate seeing you so stressed out. You don't even need to read all that boring legal jargon. The lawyer said it's totally standard. Just sign on the line and we can order takeout and relax." In my past life, I had read the jargon. I had seen the hidden clauses Mia had slipped in, clauses that made the transfer irrevocable, waiving my right to ever reclaim the property. It was a straight-up theft, disguised as a favor. But as I looked at Mia's wide, greedy eyes, a cold, calculating calm washed over me. The terror of my past death dissolved, replaced by a crystalline clarity. Hindsight wasn't just a second chance. It was an executioner's axe. And with that hindsight came the glorious, beautiful memory of what was actually attached to this house. The ultimate hidden edge that neither Liam nor Mia nor their crooked lawyers had managed to uncover in their desperate greed to steal my wealth. They looked at this villa and saw a free and clear asset. They saw millions of dollars in equity, a luxury lifestyle, and a playground for their illicit affair. What they didn't know, what nobody in the world knew except me and my late grandfather's fiercely loyal estate lawyer, was that this house was a financial time bomb. My grandfather had always been a gambler. Right before he died, he took out a massive, highly toxic balloon mortgage against this property through a ruthless shadow lender to fund a failing tech startup. The debt was tied directly to the deed, wrapped up in a convoluted, airtight trust. If the house changed hands, the mortgage didn't just stay with my grandfather's estate. The liability transferred entirely without exception to the new primary title holder. In my previous life, after I refused to sign the house over to Mia, I had quietly liquidated my mother's private, offshore inheritance, money Liam and Mia didn't know existed, to pay off the $7 million balloon payment before the deadline. I had saved the house. I had eaten the cost to protect my home. But today, in this life, I looked down at the gold pen in my hand. It felt light now. It felt like a magic wand. I didn't have to fight them. I didn't have to scream or cry or kick them out. I didn't have to drink antifreeze in a hospital bed. I just had to give them exactly what they were begging for. I took a deep, steadying breath, suppressing the feral, snarky grin that threatened to break my face in half. I let my shoulders slump, playing the role of the exhausted, terrified, utterly trusting woman they believed me to be. "You know what, Liam?" I said softly, looking up and meeting his cold blue eyes. "You're absolutely right." I dropped my gaze back to the stack of papers, my thumb brushing against the crisp edge of the first page. I flipped it, my eyes tracking across the dense size 10 font without actually reading a single word. Liam let out a breath he had been holding. The sound was faint, just a soft hiss of air through his perfectly white teeth, but to my newly awakened ears, it was as loud as a gunshot. He shifted his weight, his tense shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. He thought he had me. He thought the heavy lifting was over. Beside him, Mia leaned in closer, the sickly sweet scent of her Chanel perfume washing over me, making my newly alive stomach churn. "Take your time, babe," Liam murmured, though his fingers were tapping a nervous, erratic rhythm against his thigh. "But, the sooner we get this filed, the sooner the lawyers can get the IRS off your back." "Right," I whispered, keeping my head bowed. "The IRS." I turned another page, my eyes tracing the lines of legalese. In my past life, this was the exact moment everything had exploded. In that first timeline, I hadn't just skimmed. I had read. I had always been meticulous, a trait that had built my boutique design firm from the ground up. And that same meticulous nature had compelled me to read every single clause of this supposed temporary transfer. I remembered the exact line. Section 4, paragraph B, irrevocable surrender of rights and titles. In that past life, my blood had run cold. I had looked up, the betrayal slicing through me like a physical blade. I had demanded to know why the word irrevocable was in a document meant to be a temporary shield. I had thrown this very gold Montblanc pen across the room, watching it shatter against the marble baseboard. I had screamed until my throat was raw. Liam had immediately gone on the offensive, his charming facade dropping to reveal the gaslighting monster beneath. He had called me paranoid. He had accused me of letting my business stress make me delusional. He shouted that he was trying to save me from federal prison, and I was throwing his love back in his face. Mia had weaponized her tears, collapsing into one of these very dining chairs, sobbing hysterically about how I never trusted her, how I always treated her like an outsider just because she was my stepsister. They had spun a web of guilt so thick I almost choked on it. But I had held my ground. I had kicked Liam out, changed the locks, and hired my own forensic accountant who proved the IRS audit was a complete, fabricated sham. I had won. I had kept my house, I had protected my grandfather's legacy, and it cost me my life. I turned another page of the contract, the crisp rustle of the paper, masking the erratic hammering of my heart because they hadn't stopped. Once they realized they couldn't manipulate me into giving up the villa, they decided it was easier to simply inherit it. And to inherit it, I had to die. The memories of the months that followed rushed into my mind, a horrifying, vivid slideshow of my own murder. It hadn't been quick. They hadn't hired a hitman or staged a break-in. They had been patient. They had been intimate. Liam had come crawling back a week after our fight, begging for forgiveness, crying on his knees in the rain outside my office. He blamed his shady accountant friend, swore he had been duped too, and promised to spend the rest of his life making it up to me. Like a fool, a lonely, desperate fool who had lost her own parents years ago and just wanted a family, I took him back. Mia had baked me a cake to apologize for her dramatic reaction. We were a family again. And then the sickness started. It was subtle at first. A lingering fatigue that made my limbs feel like lead. I would wake up exhausted, my joints aching, a strange metallic taste perpetually coating the back of my tongue. I blamed the stress of running my firm. Liam was so supportive. He took over the household chores. He insisted on making my breakfast every single morning. "You need your vitamins, babe," he would say, pressing a cold, sweating glass of green smoothie into my hands before I left for the office. "Drink up. Doctor's orders?" I drank it. Every morning. I swallowed the sweet, earthy mixture of kale, green apple, ginger, and lethal, undetectable amounts of ethylene glycol. Antifreeze. I turned the fourth page of the contract, my fingernail digging into the paper so hard it nearly tore through. The fatigue morphed into agony. My kidneys began to fail, my back constantly throbbed with a dull, terrifying ache. My skin took on a sickly yellow pallor. The doctors were baffled. They ran test after test, checking for autoimmune diseases, rare cancers, generic organ failure. But because I was young and seemingly healthy, and because ethylene glycol metabolizes rapidly in the body, leaving only secondary damage behind, they didn't test for heavy, consistent poisoning until it was far, far too late. The final 2 weeks of my past life were spent in a sterile hospital room, a captive in my own decaying body. I couldn't speak. The toxins had ravaged my neurological system, leaving me paralyzed, trapped behind my own eyes. And that was when they stopped pretending. Knowing I couldn't move, knowing I couldn't press the call button or alert the nurses, Liam and Mia used my deathbed as their personal sanctuary. I remembered the exact moment my heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It was a Tuesday night. The rain was lashing against the hospital window. I was lying there, the ventilator forcing air into my ruined lungs, when Mia walked in. Liam didn't just greet her. He pulled her by the waist, pressing her against the wall next to my IV pole, and kissed her. It wasn't a comforting kiss. It was deep, hungry, and entirely practiced. They had been doing this for a long time. I was forced to watch, forced to listen, as the man I was going to marry and the sister I had sheltered stripped away every illusion I had about my life. "How much longer?" Mia had whined, wiping her lipstick off Liam's jaw. "The doctors said her liver is completely shot. Why is she hanging on?" "She's always been a stubborn bitch," Liam had replied, his voice devoid of the fake warmth he had used to coax me into drinking my daily poison. He poured himself a cup of water from my bedside pitcher. "But it doesn't matter. Her lawyer confirmed it yesterday. With her mom gone and no kids, the estate defaults to her next of kin. That's you, Mia. The house, the firm's assets, all of it. We just have to wait her out." They stood there holding hands, calculating my net worth while my monitor beeped the countdown to my death. They joked about ripping out the Italian marble in the villa and replacing it with cheap, modern terrazzo. They debated whether to sell my firm to a corporate rival or just liquidate it for the cash. They had slaughtered me, slowly and intimately, for money. I blinked, the horrific memory of the hospital room fading back into the sunlit reality of my dining room. I was breathing evenly now. The terror had burned itself out, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. Revenge. I looked at the next page of the contract. It was the deed transfer summary. Mia's full legal name was printed at the top, Mia Evelyn Vance. She wanted the house so badly she was willing to kill for it. Liam wanted the wealth so badly he was willing to watch me die for it. But as I stared at Mia's name in bold black ink, the edges of my lips twitched. Because the joke was on them. The ultimate cosmic joke that they were entirely blind to. They thought they were stealing a fully paid off $10 million architectural masterpiece. They thought they were securing their future. They had done their basic research, of course. They checked the public county records. They saw that there was no traditional mortgage filed under my name. They saw that my grandfather, Arthur, had left the property to me in a seemingly straightforward trust. But Arthur hadn't been the perfect, pristine titan of industry everyone thought he was. My grandfather was a genius architect, yes, but he was also a degenerate high-stakes gambler with a penchant for investing in spectacularly doomed ventures. 2 years before he died, his cognitive decline had started to show, masked perfectly by his arrogant charm. He had sunk his entire liquid fortune into a phantom tech startup that promised to revolutionize the energy sector. When his own money ran out, he didn't stop. He couldn't. The addiction was too deep. He needed capital, fast, and he couldn't go to a traditional bank without alerting his board of directors and tanking his public company's stock. So he went to Obsidian Holdings. Obsidian Holdings wasn't a bank. They were a Cayman Islands-based shell company run by people who wore tailored suits but operated with the morality of back-alley loan sharks. They specialized in predatory, ultra-high-interest loans for the desperate, ultra-rich, using prime real estate as collateral. My grandfather had taken out a $7 million balloon mortgage against this very villa. I only found out about it 2 days after his funeral, when his terrified estate lawyer pulled me into a soundproof room and handed me a file that looked like a bomb. The terms of the Obsidian loan were ruthless, borderline illegal, but entirely binding due to the complex web of offshore trusts Arthur had signed. It was an interest-only loan at a staggering 15% compounded monthly. But the true poison pill, the clause that made it a ticking time bomb, was the balloon payment structure and the transfer conditions. As Arthur's direct heir, the loan transferred to me with a grace period. I had 5 years to pay off the $7 million principal before they initiated immediate foreclosure and asset seizure. But there was a catch. A beautiful, glorious, lethal catch designed by Obsidian to prevent rich heirs from dodging the debt by shuffling assets around. The contract stipulated that if the primary title of the property was transferred, sold, or gifted to a non-heir, someone outside the direct bloodline, the grace period immediately evaporated. The contract would instantly default. The entire $7 million plus all accrued interest would become due in full within 14 business days of the deed transfer being filed with the county. And if the new title holder couldn't pay, Obsidian didn't just take the house. The contract included a blanket liability assumption. By accepting the deed, the new owner accepted the debt. Personally, entirely. Obsidian would seize the villa, liquidate it, and if it didn't cover the inflated debt and their exorbitant legal fees, they would go after the new owner's personal assets. They would garnish wages, freeze bank accounts, and force a total, catastrophic bankruptcy. In my first life, this secret debt had been my greatest source of anxiety. When Liam and Mia tried to force me to transfer the house, I wasn't just fighting to keep my home, I was fighting to keep them from triggering the Obsidian trap. Though I couldn't tell them why without exposing my grandfather's ruined legacy, which I had sworn to protect. After I kicked Liam out in that first timeline, I had panicked. I knew I couldn't live with the sword of Damocles hanging over my head. I had quietly accessed a private, untouchable trust fund my late mother had set up for me in Switzerland. Money Liam and Mia knew absolutely nothing about. I drained it, every single penny. I wired $7 million to the Cayman Islands and cleared the Obsidian debt. I had saved the house. I had made it a free and clear asset, which meant, ironically, I had made it perfectly ripe for Liam and Mia to steal. I had cleared the minefield for my own murderers. I paused, letting the heavy silence of the dining room settle over me. I looked at the contract again, the thick, creamy paper. The absurd, arrogant confidence of Mia's name printed as the sole new owner. In this timeline, I hadn't wired the money to the Caymans. The debt was still active. The bomb was perfectly armed. I looked up from the papers, letting my eyes drift to Mia. She was chewing on a cuticle, her eyes darting between the contract and my face. Mia, who worked 20 hours a week as a social media manager for a boutique that paid her in store credit. Mia, whose entire net worth consisted of a leased Range Rover and a closet full of fake designer bags. Mia, who threw a tantrum if her credit card was declined for a $60 brunch. She was about to legally bind herself to a $7 million debt with a 14-day fuse. And Liam, my brilliant, ambitious fiancé. Liam, who was currently tying his own financial identity to Mia's by sleeping with her and, as I clearly remembered from their hospital bed confessions, planning to officially marry her the second my body was cold. If she went down in a catastrophic multi-million-dollar bankruptcy fraud case, the blast radius would obliterate him too. Obsidian's lawyers would tear through his accounts, his startup investments, his entire pristine reputation, looking for the money. They wanted my life. They wanted my crown. I was going to give them the crown, completely unaware that it was lined with razor blades. Is something wrong with the wording? Liam asked, his voice tightening with a microscopic edge of impatience. He took a half step forward, his shadow falling across the documents. The lawyer said it's a standard boilerplate transfer. We really shouldn't delay, Chloe. If the IRS files the lien tomorrow, we're screwed. I fought down the urge to laugh directly in his face. It took every ounce of self-control I had cultivated over years of high-stakes business negotiations to keep my expression completely blank. I let a perfectly calibrated look of exhaustion wash over my features. I slumped my shoulders slightly, letting the heavy gold pen dangle loosely in my grip. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I infused it with a heavy, defeated sigh. No, there's nothing wrong with the wording. You're right, I'm just so tired, Liam. I'm so tired of fighting. I'm terrified they're going to take everything. Liam's posture immediately relaxed. The tension leached out of his shoulders, and that greasy, patronizing smile returned to his face. He reached out, his hand covering mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles. The touch made my skin crawl so violently I thought I might actually vomit on his Armani shoes, but I forced my hand to remain still. I know, babe, he cooed, playing the role of the devoted protector to absolute perfection. I know you're scared, but that's why I'm here. That's why Mia is here. We are your family. We're going to protect you. Just sign the papers and this nightmare will be over. I promise. This nightmare will be over. He had no idea how right he was. I looked at Mia. She gave me a brave, trembling smile, reaching across the table to squeeze my other hand. We've got you, Chloe. I'd do anything for you. You know that. I do, I said, looking deeply into her doe eyes, ensuring she saw the absolute, unwavering trust in mine. I know exactly what you're willing to do for me, Mia. I gently pulled my hands out from under theirs. I sat up a little straighter, gripping the Montblanc pen firmly. The ink cartridge was full. The legal trap they had meticulously laid for me was wide open, waiting for me to step into it. but they had forgotten one crucial rule of hunting. When you set a snare in the dark, you better make sure you know exactly what kind of monster you're inviting in. I shifted the first page, aligning the neon yellow sticky note perfectly in my line of sight. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I pressed the gold nib to the paper. The gold nib of the Montblanc pen met the thick, cream-colored cotton paper with a crisp, decisive scratch. I didn't just sign my name. I performed a masterclass in capitulation. I let my hand tremble just a fraction, a subtle tremor that caused my signature to look slightly rushed, slightly panicked. The signature of a terrified woman pushed to the absolute brink. I heard Mia suck in a sharp, greedy breath through her teeth as I finished the first page. It was the sound of a tick smelling blood. "Okay," I whispered, my voice thick with manufactured anxiety. "That's one." "You're doing the right thing, Chloe," Liam murmured, hovering over my shoulder like a gargoyle. His expensive cologne, a heavy mix of bergamot and cedar, suddenly smelled suffocating, like the interior of a closed casket. He reached out and gently flipped the page for me, his perfectly manicured finger tapping the next neon yellow sticky note. "Right here, babe. Just the transfer of title addendum." I looked down at the page. My eyes quickly scanned the dense block of text, picking out the subtle, insidious alterations Mia and her discount lawyer had made to the standard boilerplate. There it was. Section 2, Clause C. The grantee, Mia Evelyn Vance, hereby assumes all rights, privileges, appurtenances, and encumbrances associated with the property, effectively immediately upon execution of this document, irrevocably and in perpetuity, encumbrances. Mia had undoubtedly asked her lawyer to include that word, thinking it meant she would have to pay the property taxes and the ridiculous neighborhood HOA fees, a small price to pay to solidify her ironclad grip on my $10 million estate. She thought irrevocably was her safety net, the magical legal lock that would prevent me from ever dragging her to court to reverse the transfer once the fake audit blew over. She wanted to make absolutely certain that no judge in the state could force her to hand the keys back to me. She was locking herself in a cage, entirely unaware that the cage was sitting on the tracks of an oncoming freight train. "Is this the one about the taxes?" I asked, looking up at Mia with wide, doe-like eyes, perfectly mirroring the expression she had weaponized against me for a decade. "I just want to make sure you won't get in trouble for my property taxes, Mia. I'd feel terrible." "Oh, don't worry about it, sis," Mia chirped, her voice pitching an octave higher in her excitement. She was practically vibrating in her chair, her eyes fixed on the pen in my hand with a hypnotic intensity. "It's just standard legal speak. It just means I'll handle the boring paperwork stuff while you focus on saving your company. I've got it all under control. I'd take on any burden for you, Chloe. You're my sister. Any burden." I almost choked on a laugh. The sheer blinding irony of her words was a physical weight in my chest. "You're too good to me," I whispered, dropping my gaze back to the paper. I signed the second page, then the third. The scratch of the pen on paper was the only sound in the cavernous dining room, echoing off the imported Italian marble and the vaulted ceilings. With every stroke of my pen, the invisible, suffocating weight of my grandfather's $7 million mistake lifted from my shoulders and settled heavily, permanently, onto Mia's fragile little cardigan. Page 4. The Waiver of Independent Legal Counsel. I signed it, legally validating their predatory ambush. Page 5. The Final Deed Execution. I paused, hovering the pen over the final line. I let the silence stretch, stretching it until it became a physical pressure in the room. I could feel Liam's heart pounding from where he stood behind me. I could see the pulse jumping wildly in the hollow of Mia's throat. They were terrified I was going to back out at the last second. They were sweating. I let them sweat for 10 agonizing seconds. Then, with a heavy, dramatic sigh, I brought the pen down and slashed my final signature across the bottom of the page. It was done. I dropped the pen on the table. It landed with a dull, heavy clatter that sounded like a prison door slamming shut. "There," I said, my voice hollow, my shoulders slumping as I leaned back in the heavy oak chair. I pushed the massive stack of papers toward Mia. "It's all yours, Mia, literally." The transformation was instantaneous. The heavy, suffocating tension that had gripped the room evaporated, replaced by an electric, almost toxic wave of euphoria from the two vultures sitting across from me. Mia practically snatched the paperwork off the polished wood. She clutched the thick stack of paper to her chest, her knuckles turning white. The manufactured innocence melted off her face, replaced by a grin so wide and triumphant it looked feral. Her eyes swept over the dining room, taking in the crystal chandelier, the custom drapery, the sweeping staircase in the foyer. She wasn't looking at my home anymore, she was looking at her kingdom. Liam exhaled a long, shuddering breath. The mask of the concerned, protective fiancé didn't just slip, it was discarded entirely. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a smug, greasy smirk spreading across his handsome features. He looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw the genuine contempt in his cold blue eyes. The contempt of a predator who has successfully tricked its prey into walking straight into the slaughterhouse. "You did the right thing, Chloe," Liam said, his tone entirely devoid of the warmth he had used just 5 minutes prior. It was brisk, businesslike, dismissive. He was already moving on. "This is the smartest move for everyone. The lawyers will file this with the county clerk first thing in the morning." "I'm sure they will," I murmured, watching the two of them exchange a lightning-fast, victorious glance. It was a look of shared complicity, a silent celebration of their successful heist. Mia carefully set the papers back down on the table, smoothing the top page with reverence. "I'll keep these in the safe in the study," she announced, already claiming the geography of the house. "The study, my grandfather's study, my private office." "Good idea," I said, standing up and smoothing down the skirt of my dress. I kept my movements slow, deliberate, maintaining the facade of a defeated woman. "Actually, since the house is officially in your name now, I think I'm going to go ahead and move out." They both froze. The triumphant smirks vanished, replaced by identical looks of panic. "Move out?" Mia asked, her voice cracking slightly. She stood up so fast her chair scraped harshly against the marble floor. "But where will you go? You don't have to leave, Chloe. This is just a temporary thing on paper. We can all stay here. There's plenty of room." Of course she wanted me to stay. Transferring the deed didn't magically put money in her empty bank account. She still needed me here. She needed me to pay the $3,000 monthly utility bills, the landscaping crew, the pool maintenance, the astronomical property taxes, and the grocery bills that fed her and my fiancé. She wanted the title of the queen without having to pay for the castle. Nonsense. I waved a hand dismissively, injecting a note of firm, martyrdom-laced logic into my voice. Liam was just saying how serious this audit is. If the government agents are watching me, and they probably are, and they see me living comfortably in a $10 million villa I just divested to my sister, they'll know immediately that it's a shell game. They'll claim it's a fraudulent transfer to dodge asset seizure. I turned to Liam, locking eyes with him. "Isn't that right, Liam? You said they look for exactly that kind of behavior." I threw his own fabricated bullshit right back in his face, and I watched, thoroughly entertained, as he choked on it. He opened his mouth, desperately searching for a counter-argument, but he was trapped by his own intricate lies. If he backtracked now and said that IRS wouldn't care, it would invalidate the entire premise of the ambush. Well, yes, Liam stammered, his jaw clenching in frustration. "They do look for that, but we could say you're renting a room from Mia and generate a fake paper trail of rental payments that a forensic accountant would tear through in 10 seconds. I countered sharply, feigning a sudden burst of panicked energy. No, that's too risky. If we're going to do this, we have to do it flawlessly. I have to physically leave. I have to establish residency somewhere else, so this transfer is entirely bulletproof. I looked back at Mia, offering her a tragic, brave smile. "I have to leave Mia tonight. I'll just pack a single bag and stay at a hotel downtown for a while, just until the heat dies down. You take care of the house. You're the lady of the manor now." Mia looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. She looked at Liam, pleading for him to fix this, to force the cash cow to stay in the barn, but Liam was cornered. He gave her a subtle, tight shake of his head. He was willing to sacrifice the utility payments to ensure the deed transfer went through without me changing my mind. "Okay, babe," Liam said, forcing a heavy, sympathetic sigh. He stepped forward and tried to wrap his arms around me. A final performance of affection. "If you really think it's the safest play, let me help you pack. I can drive you to the hotel." I expertly sidestepped his embrace, heading toward the grand staircase in the foyer. No, if they're watching, they can't see us together. You two stay here. Make it look natural. I'll just be a minute." I didn't wait for their response. I gripped the mahogany handrail and ascended the stairs, my posture straight, my steps measured. The moment I turned the corner on the landing, out of their line of sight, the facade crumbled. I didn't collapse in tears. I pressed my back against the silk wallpapered hallway, covered my mouth with both hands, and laughed. It was a silent, violently shaking laugh that brought tears of pure, unadulterated joy to my eyes. I had done it. The trap was sprung, the bomb was armed and sitting comfortably in Mia's lap. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked down the long, carpeted hallway to the master suite. Pushing open the double doors, I stepped into the massive, sunlit room that had been my sanctuary for the last 5 years. It was beautiful. The king-size canopy bed, the custom velvet chaise lounge, the walk-in closet that was larger than most Manhattan apartments. In my previous life, leaving this room had felt like tearing off a limb. I had cried into the pillows. I had mourned the loss of my safety. Now I looked around and felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of relief. This room wasn't a sanctuary, it was a tomb. It was the place where Liam had systematically lied to me every night. It was the place where, in a timeline that no longer existed, they had slowly poisoned my morning drinks, laughing while my body withered away in these very sheets. I wasn't mourning the house. I was escaping the crime scene. I walked into the walk-in closet and pulled down a sleek, black leather duffel bag from the top shelf. I didn't bother with the designer dresses, the expensive heels, or the custom-tailored suits. Obsidian Holdings would take all of it anyway when the bankruptcy hit. They would seize the furniture, the art, the clothes, auctioning it all off for pennies on the dollar to recoup their loan. Taking it would just give Mia grounds to report it stolen. I needed to travel light, and I needed to travel rich. I bypassed the clothes and went straight to the heavy steel floor safe hidden beneath a false floorboard in the back corner of the closet. I spun the dial, the familiar clicks echoing in the quiet room. Inside was the real treasure. Things the deed transfer didn't touch. Things that were entirely, legally mine, completely separate from the estate. I pulled out a heavy mahogany box. Inside was my mother's private jewelry collection. Vintage Cartier, flawless diamonds, emeralds the size of quail eggs. Untraceable, highly liquid assets worth easily $3 million on the private market. I unceremoniously dumped the glittering contents directly into the duffel bag. Next came the bearer bonds, a relic of my grandfather's paranoia that he had given me off the books on my 18th birthday. Another $1 million easily. I tossed them in. Then the most important piece of paper I owned, a thick, leather-bound portfolio containing the routing numbers, access codes, and legal documentation for the offshore trust my mother had established in Switzerland. The very same trust I had drained in my previous life to pay off the obsidian debt. This time, the $7 million sitting in that account was going to stay exactly where it was. It was my war chest. I threw my passport, a stack of emergency cash, and my encrypted laptop into the bag, zipping it shut with a satisfying rasp. I had everything I needed to disappear and rebuild an empire. I slung the heavy duffel bag over my shoulder and walked out of the closet. There was only one thing left to do. "Barnaby," I called out softly. A soft marararpai sounded from the master bathroom. A massive, fluffy Maine Coon cat with piercing green eyes sauntered out, his tail held high in a question mark. Barnaby had hated Liam from day one. In my past life, Barnaby had mysteriously run away 2 weeks before I was admitted to the hospital. I knew now that Liam had probably driven him out to the woods and dumped him. Not this time. "Come here, handsome," I whispered, scooping the 20-pound ball of fur into my arms. I grabbed his custom leather carrier from the corner of the room, gently maneuvering him inside and zipping the mesh closed. I took one last look around the master suite. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long, bloody streaks of orange and red across the white carpet. It was a beautiful house, it really was. "Goodbye," I said to the empty room. "Enjoy the repo, men." I picked up the duffel bag in one hand, the cat carrier in the other, and walked out of the room, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the hardwood floors of the hallway. As I approached the top of the grand staircase, I paused, listening. The sound drifted up from the living room, sharp and distinct. Pop! The unmistakable sound of a champagne cork being fired into the air. I crept to the edge of the landing and looked down through the wrought iron banister. Liam and Mia were standing by the massive marble fireplace in the sunken living room. Liam was pouring a bottle of Dom Perignon, my vintage $1,000 bottle of Dom Perignon that I had been saving for my wedding day, into 2 crystal flutes. They weren't acting like a brother and sister-in-law dealing with a stressful IRS audit. They were acting like lottery winners. Liam handed a glass to Mia, his eyes raking over her body with a predatory, victorious gleam. He leaned in, wrapping his free arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. She giggled, a bright, triumphant sound, tilting her head back to accept his kiss. It was a mirror image of the kiss they had shared over my hospital bed. A cold fury, sharper than a razor blade, sliced through my chest, but I welcomed it. It honed my focus. It cemented my resolve. I wasn't just surviving this time. I was going to annihilate them. I took a heavy step down the stairs, letting my heel strike the wood with maximum force. The sound shattered their private celebration. They sprang apart like two guilty teenagers, champagne sloshing over the rims of their crystal flutes and staining the antique Persian rug. Liam hurriedly set his glass down, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, while Mia nervously smoothed her cardigan, her face flushed crimson. I descended the rest of the stairs slowly, a portrait of tragic grace, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the cat carrier swinging gently by my side. "Celebrating?" I asked, my voice echoing in the sudden silence of the cavernous foyer. Liam cleared his throat, adjusting his suit jacket, desperately trying to regain his composure. "Just taking the edge off, Chloe. It's been an incredibly stressful day. We were just toasting to your safety, to the house being secure." "Right," I said, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't move toward them. I kept my distance, standing in the marble entryway. "To my safety." I looked at Mia. She was trembling slightly, holding the champagne flute like a shield. "Are you taking the cat?" she asked, her voice tight. "Barnaby doesn't handle stress well," I lied smoothly. "I thought it best to keep him out of your way while you manage the estate. I wouldn't want him scratching up the furniture you're going to be taking care of." "Oh, okay," Mia said, clearly relieved that there would be one less living thing in the house demanding her attention. I adjusted the strap of the duffel bag on my shoulder. It was heavy, packed with millions of dollars of untraceable wealth, but it felt lighter than air. "Well, I said, injecting a final, masterful dose of melancholy into my voice. "I suppose this is it. For now, anyway. The lawyer has my burner number if there's an emergency with the deed filing tomorrow, but otherwise, I need to stay completely off the grid." Liam took a step toward me, playing his role until the bitter end. He looked deeply into my eyes, summoning a look of profound, soulful sorrow. "I love you, Chloe. We're going to fix this. We're going to get through this audit, and you'll be back home before you know it. Just stay safe." I looked at the man who had ordered my death, the man who had poured poison down my throat while smiling at me. "I love you too, Liam." I lied smoothly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I shifted my gaze to Mia, who was watching me with wide, glittering eyes, the deed to a poisoned empire practically burning a hole in her pocket. "Thank you, Mia," I said, my voice dripping with an earnestness that made me want to gag. "Thank you for taking this on. You have no idea what a massive, life-altering burden you've lifted off my shoulders today. I am entirely in your debt." The sheer, double-edged brilliance of the statement flew entirely over her head. She beamed, a radiant, victorious smile stretching across her face. "Anything for you, sis," she chirped, raising her champagne glass an inch in my direction. "Don't you worry about a single thing. I've got the house. You just focus on yourself." "I absolutely will," I promised. I turned away from them, reached out, and grasped the heavy brass handle of the front door. I pulled it open, the crisp, cool evening air rushing into the stagnant, suffocating atmosphere of the villa. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I stepped over the threshold, pulling the door shut behind me. The heavy oak slammed into the frame with a resounding final thud, cutting off the sight of Liam and Mia in my foyer. I stood on the front porch for a single, suspended moment, breathing in the scent of the pine trees and the distant exhaust of city traffic. The air felt different. It felt electric. It felt alive. I walked down the winding stone driveway to my matte black Porsche Cayenne. I loaded Barnaby into the passenger seat, threw the heavy duffel bag into the back, and slid behind the leather steering wheel. I started the engine, the aggressive purr of the twin-turbo V8 vibrating through my bones. I put the car in drive, hit the button for the massive wrought iron gates at the end of the driveway, and accelerated. As I pulled out onto the main road, the gates slowly swinging shut behind me, locking the predators inside the cage, I looked up into the rearview mirror. The downtown villa loomed against the twilight sky, its massive windows glowing with warm, golden light. Inside, I knew Liam and Mia were probably pouring another glass of my expensive champagne, laughing at my stupidity, celebrating their flawless victory. They thought they had just stolen a $10 million fortune. They had actually just signed the paperwork for their own financial execution. A wild, feral smile stretched across my face, breaking the calm facade I had maintained for the last hour. A laugh clawed its way up my throat, bursting out of me in a loud, joyous, entirely unhinged shout that echoed in the luxurious cabin of the Porsche. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the car rocketing forward into the night, leaving the doomed house and the ghosts of my past life far behind. The trap was set. The fuse was lit. All I had to do now was pour a drink and watch the explosion. The next 14 days were a masterclass in aggressive, unapologetic indulgence. I didn't just check into a hotel. I secured the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons in Manhattan under a newly formed anonymous LLC. The suite cost $5,000 a night, a price tag that would have given me a panic attack in my previous life. Now it was pocket change. I spent my mornings wrapped in a plush monogrammed robe, sipping imported espresso on a private terrace overlooking Central Park while Barnaby sunbathed on the imported silk rugs. My afternoons were spent in secure mahogany-paneled boardrooms with some of the most ruthless and discreet wealth managers on the Eastern Seaboard. I liquidated my mother's $3 million vintage jewelry collection through a private broker who asked 0 questions and took his 2% commission with a polite nod. The bearer bonds were cashed and immediately funneled into a labyrinth of high-yield offshore accounts, joining the $7 million that was already sitting safely in Switzerland. By the end of the first week, I had a liquid net worth north of $11 million, spread across 3 continents, completely untraceable to Chloe Vance, the supposedly terrified, audited woman who had fled her home with nothing but a duffel bag. I bought a whole new wardrobe, designer, custom-tailored, fabrics that felt like liquid against my skin. I hired a personal chef. I slept for 10 hours a night without the lingering, terrifying, metallic taste of antifreeze in the back of my throat. I felt my body detoxifying, regenerating, buzzing with the sheer, intoxicating energy of a predator who had just successfully flipped the food chain. I didn't check my old phone. I had snapped it in half and dropped it into a storm drain the night I left the villa. I did, however, purchase a cheap, plastic prepaid burner phone. I sent a single, encrypted email from a secure server to my grandfather's fiercely loyal estate lawyer, giving him the burner number with explicit instructions. When Liam inevitably threatens you with a lawsuit to find me, give him this number. Tell him I begged you not to. I kept the burner phone turned off, sitting perfectly in the center of the glass coffee table in my penthouse suite. I knew the exact timeline of the Obsidian Holdings contract. I knew that it took the county clerk approximately 5 to 7 business days to officially process and digitize a deed transfer. I knew that Obsidian's automated web crawlers monitored the county databases on a weekly basis, and I knew that once they saw Arthur Vance's estate had transferred the title of the downtown villa to Mia Evelyn Vance, a non-heir, the 14-day grace period would instantly evaporate. I marked the days on a calendar in red ink. Day 8, the deed was likely processed. Day 10, Obsidian's algorithms would have flagged the transfer. Day 12, the legal notices would be overnighted via courier. On the morning of the 15th day, a crisp Tuesday, I woke up, ordered a ridiculous breakfast of lobster Benedict and fresh squeezed mimosa, and sat down on the velvet sofa. I picked up the plastic burner phone. I held the power button. The cheap screen flickered to life, the bright logo mocking the silence of the room. It took 30 seconds for the phone to connect to the cellular towers. When it did, the device nearly vibrated out of my hand. It didn't just ring, it exploded. A cascade of notifications flooded the tiny screen, chiming in a frantic, overlapping cacophony of digital panic. 142 missed calls, 87 new voicemails, 304 unread text messages. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my mimosa, savoring the effervescent sting of the champagne on my tongue. I leaned back against the cushions, propped my bare feet up on the glass table, and tapped the voicemail icon. I started from the very beginning. The first voicemail was from day 12. It was Mia. "Hey, Chloe," Mia's voice crackled through the tiny speaker. She sounded annoyed, playing the role of the put-upon sister. "So a courier just showed up at the gates and practically shoved a bunch of thick envelopes into my hands. It's addressed to me, but it keeps mentioning Grandpa Arthur and the trust. It looks like some kind of junk mail from a place called Obsidian, but it's super aggressive. Can you call me? I don't want to deal with your old estate trash while I'm trying to redecorate the living room." I smiled. Redecorating. She was probably picking out cheap terrazzo to replace the marble, just like they had joked about over my deathbed. The second voicemail, logged 6 hours later, was from Liam. Chloe, pick up the damn phone. The smooth, patronizing charm was gone. His voice was clipped, tight with an undercurrent of genuine anxiety. Mia showed me those letters. They aren't junk mail. They're foreclosure notices. They're claiming the property was used as collateral for a $7 million loan. What the hell is going on? Did your grandfather take out a second mortgage? You need to call my lawyer right now. We have to clear this up before it affects Mia's credit. Before it affects Mia's credit. Oh, Liam, you sweet, arrogant fool. It was going to do a lot more than affect her credit. I skipped ahead to day 13. Chloe, where the hell are you? Liam was shouting now. The background noise was chaotic, the sharp sound of slamming doors and rushing footsteps. I just got off the phone with Obsidian Holdings. They're not a bank, Chloe. They're a fucking loan shark operation. They said the loan is in default because the deed transferred. They said the balance is due immediately. $7 million plus $2 million in compounded interest. Call me back right fucking now. The next voicemail was a symphony of pure, unadulterated terror. It was Mia, and she was hyperventilating. Chloe, please, you have to answer. She was sobbing, the wet, ugly sounds of a woman realizing the ground had just opened up beneath her feet. I went to the dealership this morning to pick up my new Range Rover, the one Liam co-signed for. My card was declined. All of them. The bank teller looked at me like I was a criminal. She said my accounts are frozen. All of them. There's a $9 million hold on my checking account. How is that even possible? I only have $4,000. Chloe, fix this. Tell them it's your house. I let out a soft, contented sigh, petting Barnaby as he curled up next to me. The trap hadn't just sprung. The steel jaws had clamped shut, shattering the bone. By accepting the deed, Mia had triggered the immediate assumption of liability. Obsidian's lawyers were notoriously vicious. They didn't wait for court dates. They filed emergency injunctions. They slapped liens on everything attached to her social security number. I kept listening, watching their sanity unravel hour by hour, and day 14. You bitch. It was Liam. His voice was no longer a shout. It was a low, venomous hiss that sent a thrill of pure victory straight down my spine. I read the contract, Chloe. I hired a crisis team. And we went through the transfer papers you signed. We went through the clauses Mia's idiot lawyer added. He let out a breathless, manic laugh. Irrevocable. She made the transfer irrevocable, and she signed a blanket assumption of all encumbrances. You knew, didn't you? You sat there looking like a terrified little mouse, and you knew exactly what you were handing over. You gave us a bomb. A crash echoed in the background of the recording, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. They're taking the house, Chloe, Liam snarled, his voice cracking. But they aren't stopping there. The house won't cover the principal, the interest, and their exorbitant legal fees at auction. They're coming after Mia for the difference. They're forcing her into Chapter 7, but she doesn't have any money. There was a long, heavy pause on the recording. I could hear his ragged breathing. The horrific realization was dawning on him. We got legally engaged last week, Liam whispered, the horror finally bleeding into his tone. We filed the domestic partnership paperwork so I could get on the title of the house later. Our finances are linked. Obsidian's lawyers just subpoenaed my company's financial records. My investors are pulling out. They're freezing my startup capital because I'm legally tethered to a woman who owes $9 million to offshore loan sharks. You ruined me. I didn't ruin you, Liam, I said aloud to the empty penthouse. You did that all by yourself. I scrolled down to the very last voicemail. It had been left 10 minutes ago. Before I could press play, the screen of the burner phone lit up, vibrating aggressively against the glass table. Incoming call. Liam. My pulse spiked, a rush of adrenaline flooding my system. This was the moment. I picked up the phone, swiped the green icon, and brought it to my ear. I didn't say hello. I just listened. I know you have this phone. Liam's voice was ragged, desperate, and completely stripped of its usual slick polish. He sounded like a man standing on the ledge of a skyscraper. Your lawyer finally broke. I know you're listening, Chloe. I am, I said, my voice calm, cool, and perfectly level. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Just hearing my voice, hearing how unbothered I was, seemed to break something inside him. Reverse it, Liam demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sheer panic. Call Obsidian. Tell them it was a fraudulent transfer. Tell them you were under duress. I don't care what you say. Just take the fucking house back. Now, why would I do that? I asked, examining my pristine manicure. Mia made it explicitly clear in the paperwork that the transfer was irrevocable. I wouldn't want to disrespect her legal wishes. She didn't know about the debt, Liam screamed, his composure shattering entirely. You withheld material information. We'll sue you for fraud, Chloe. We'll drag you into court and prove you set us up. I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed in the luxurious suite. Sue me? I mocked. With what money, Liam? Your accounts are frozen. Your investors are fleeing. And on what grounds? You were the one who orchestrated the transfer. You bypassed my lawyer. You explicitly instructed Mia's bargain bin attorney to waive the standard title search to rush the paperwork through because you were so desperate to steal my assets before your fake IRS audit timeline expired. I let the silence hang for a second, letting the brutal reality of his own hubris sink in. You drafted the weapon, Liam, I whispered into the receiver. You loaded the gun. All I did was hand it to you and watch you shoot yourselves. You're a monster, he breathed, the words laced with a profound, helpless terror. No, I corrected him, my voice dropping to a deadly serious register, shedding the last remnants of the woman he thought he knew. I'm a survivor. You think I didn't know what you two were doing? You think I didn't know you were sleeping with her in my house? You think I didn't see you pacing like a vulture, just waiting to strip my carcass clean? Chloe, please, save it, I snapped, the venom finally leaking into my tone. In another life, I fought you. I tried to keep the house. And you know what happened? You poisoned me. You slipped antifreeze into my drinks until my kidneys shut down. And you stood over my hospital bed, kissing my sister, waiting for me to flatline. What are you talking about? Liam stammered, entirely derailed by my words. Poison? Are you insane? We never did that. You didn't get the chance to, I said smoothly, I'd say. Because this time I didn't fight you. I gave you exactly what you wanted. You wanted my grandfather's legacy. You got it. Every single crushing toxic ounce of it. Chloe, please. Liam was openly weeping now, the sound pathetic and hollow. They're here. The repo men are at the gates. They have a court order. They're taking the cars. They're changing the locks. Mia is locked in the bathroom, screaming that she's going to kill herself. I have nothing. My company is dead. My reputation is gone. Please. You have the money. I know your mother left you a private trust. I know you can pay this off. Save us. The audacity, the sheer breathtaking entitlement. He was begging for the very money he had planned to steal over my dead body. I'm going to give you a piece of advice, Liam, I said softly, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looking out at the sprawling, magnificent skyline of Manhattan. When the bankruptcy courts are done picking your bones clean and you and Mia are living in a roach-infested studio apartment trying to figure out how to pay for groceries on minimum wage, don't drink the green smoothies. Chloe, I hung up. I didn't just end the call. I powered the phone down, removed the SIM card, snapped it in half, and dropped it into the dregs of my morning coffee. I walked back to the velvet sofa, picked up my encrypted laptop, and opened the web browser. I navigated to the local news blogs for my old city. It didn't take long to find it. They were front-page news. Scandal in the Hills. Local tech bro and fiancé face catastrophic foreclosure. I clicked the link. There was a high-definition video embedded at the top of the article, shot by a neighborhood busybody over the wrought iron gates of the villa. I hit play. The scene was absolute, delicious chaos. 3 massive moving trucks were parked on the manicured lawn, tearing up the imported grass. Men in heavy boots were carrying out my custom furniture, my expensive art, the giant flat-screen televisions. In the center of the driveway stood Liam and Mia. They were unrecognizable. Liam's tailored Armani suit was rumpled and stained with sweat. His hair was wild. Mia was wearing the same pastel cardigan from the day of the signing, but it was torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with mascara and sheer panic. They weren't fighting the repo men. They were fighting each other. This is your fault, Liam was screaming, pointing a trembling finger in Mia's face. The audio was clear enough to catch the viciousness in his voice. You had to have the house. You had to make it irrevocable, you stupid, greedy little bitch. Me, Mia shrieked, lunging at him, her manicured nails clawing at his chest. This was your plan. You brought the fake accountant. You pushed her out. You tied your finances to mine, you idiot. You ruined my life. Liam grabbed her wrists, shoving her backwards so hard she stumbled and fell onto the pristine driveway, scraping her knees on the stone. She burst into ugly, hysterical tears, curling into a ball on the ground as the repo men casually wheeled a $1,000 espresso machine past her. I watched the video 3 times. I watched the man who had planned to murder me and the sister who had cheered him on tear each other to shreds in the ruins of the empire they tried to steal. They were bankrupt. They were publicly humiliated. They were legally bound to a mountain of debt they could never escape, and they were stuck with each other. I closed the laptop, a profound, unbroken silence settling over the penthouse. The headache was gone. The phantom taste of poison was gone. I walked over to the silver ice bucket, pulled out the bottle of vintage champagne, and poured myself a fresh glass. I walked out onto the terrace, the wind catching my hair, the city buzzing with infinite possibilities below me. I raised my glass to the skyline, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across my face. To the new title holders, may they rot in their castle,